A mother knocks on her neighbor's door to defend her children. Seconds later, she's shot through the door and dies in front of her 10-year-old son. This isn't fiction. This is a true story that happened only 2 years ago. Ajike Owens was a devoted mother of 4, beloved in her community, but a long-simmering feud with a neighbor exploded into tragedy. And what followed sparked a national outrage. Was this self-defense? Or was it a cold-blooded killing wrapped in racism and fear? This is the story of Ajike, a woman taken way too soon, and a justice system put to the test. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of A Brush with Death. I'm your host, Miss Casey Hanalei, and in this series I sit down, I tell you a true crime story, and I paint you a pretty picture at the same time. But today I'm going to do a little something different, and I'm going to draw you a pretty picture at the same time. So, if you love art and you love true crime, go ahead and comment and like this video, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss one of my terrible, but hopefully inspirational stories. So, before we get into it, I want to introduce you to our special guest, which is a piece I did about 10 years ago for Pride Month, and she is called Withered Beauty. The original sold, so this is a print, canvas print of her, and oh, I love her so much. The original had, the flower crown was all 3D and stuff, so it was just really rad. So anyways, so in honor of Pride Month, she is out and about right now. So who are we talking about today? We are talking about the horrible and senseless death of Ajike Owens. And this case is very, we'll talk about racial bias in this case pretty heavily. So if that is triggering for you, if you can't take something like that right now, I completely understand. Go ahead and skip this video, and I will see you in the next one. Love you. Bye. Okay, bye. But anyways, if you want to stick around and hear the story and we'll get into it, that's who we will be talking about today. So let's just do it, guys. Let's just get into the case. Okay, so Ajike A.J. Owens was born January 13th, 1988 in Broward County, Florida, to her mother, Pamela Diaz, and she only had one sibling. She was a mother of 4, 3 boys and 1 girl. She had her hands full. She was a very devoted single mother, from all accounts I could find. She was described as having a very infectious smile and lit up a room every time she went into one. AJ was deeply loved and described by family and friends as very caring, generous, and protective. She was also very active in her community. As a teen mom, she was a football mom. She was a cheerleader mom. She also led a praise dance group at her church. We actually have one at our church, and it's always those women are always so they usually play like a praise song, right? And they have this dance routine, and it kind of just like builds, and it's very emotionally moving. If you've never seen one before, I would definitely encourage you to look online, and there's tons of YouTube videos on them and stuff like that. But anyways, that'll come back later. So she even had this program where she would sell frozen treats called Lily Dillies with her children to teach them entrepreneurial skills as well. So she was very involved and very devoted. I'll talk about this later, but like someone who's maybe not necessarily a good person, I feel like you don't see them in these types of activities, right? So just maybe more evidence to confirm who AJ actually was, right? So she has 4 children. She's a single mom. She's living in Ocala, Florida, which is a residential community in Marin County. she had a neighbor named Susan Lawrence. It's spelled Lorincz, so the CZ is tripping me up, so I'm sorry if I'm not saying that right. But anyways, we'll call her Susan. And they had a very long-standing history of conflict, her and AJ. So Susan had frequently complained about AJ's children playing in the field near her house. And, you know, AJ's family and community members alleged that Susan had even made some racial slurs and some threats towards not only her neighbors, but her neighbors' children in the past, and not just AJ's family. So we're already, you know, getting some good intel on Susan here. And by the way, Ajike is a black woman and Susan is an older white woman. So just facts, you know, I'm just laying it out there. Anyways, so we get to the fateful day on June 2nd, 2023, just 2 years ago at approximately 9 p.m. AJ's young sons had been playing in a nearby field near Susan's home. One of her children had reportedly left an iPad in the field. Now, like, I don't know if any of this was verified. This is just what they told police and what was testified in court later. Susan allegedly took the tablet and threw a roller skate at one of AJ's children when they tried to retrieve the tablet. So, it's really nice. Really nice human behavior we're displaying here. After hearing about this, like a good mama bear does, AJ went to Susan's door with her 10-year-old son to address the issue. As she knocked and spoke, you know, addressing Susan, like, hey, you know, we need to talk. Like, I heard that you hurt one of my children, you know, whatever she said, right? It was later testified that her son witnessed all of this, that she was very calm. She wasn't yelling, screaming, banging on the door, anything like that. She was, you know, just acting like a normal person would. Anyways, so Susan grabs a .38 caliber handgun and through a locked door, metal door, shoots AJ in the chest, knocking her down. The shooting occurred, like I said, in front of her 10-year-old son. He attempted CPR, but could not save his mother, which I can't even imagine a 10-year-old witnessing this. My goodness. Susan called the police. Obviously, it was too late. Owens was rushed to the hospital, but pronounced dead shortly after her arrival. So, just from the facts, right, this was completely unprovoked, unwarranted, unneeded, tragic. So, like you might imagine, the shooting ignited a widespread protest in Florida and online. Hashtag Justice for Ajike Owens trended nationwide, and prominent civil rights attorney Ben Crump, who's a hoe, who's a hoe? He's not a hoe. Oh my god. Who's a high-profile civil. I'm sorry for laughing. I'm like welling up with tears with this case, so maybe a little laugh is good for me. Anyways, Ben Crump is a high-profile civil rights case, works with high-profile civil rights cases, like Trayvon Martin's, who we'll talk about in a little bit. He joined the family's legal team at this time, and he was very outspoken about this case as well. Critics drew parallels between Ahmaud Arbery, his case in 2020. He was the young black man who was shot while jogging during the daytime in 2020. You probably remember that on the news. And then also parallels between AJ's case and Trayvon Martin's case, who was killed in 2012 by a neighborhood watch volunteer. So a lot of people were drawing parallels between this and also the stand your ground law will come into this as well. So this was creating a lot of turmoil and protesting because it seemed like nothing was really happening. No arrest had been made, and this was an older white woman shooting an unarmed, unprovoking Black woman in front of her 10-year-old son. So I don't know what you expect to happen at that point, right? So, but luckily 4 days, maybe not luckily, but freaking 4 days later, so it took them a whole 4 days of public pressure, June 6, 2023, for them to arrest Susan Lawrence, who was 60 years old, and charged with manslaughter with a firearm, culpable negligence, battery, and 2 counts of assault. She pleaded not guilty and held on a $150,000 $150K bail, which, okay, great. So the controversy with this and the arrest and all, many questioned why it took frickin' 4 days to arrest her. And authorities replied by saying that they initially hesitated because they needed to evaluate the stand your ground application, right? If, she was pleading not guilty, and she was also saying this was done in self-defense. But the 10-year-old witness is saying that it was unprovoked and behind a closed, locked metal door. But again, it took them 4 days to evaluate whether or not stand your ground applied, I guess. But anyways. So while they're getting ready for trial, a lot of evidence and stuff is being, made public so that the public knows what's going on in the case. So it was verified that Susan shot AJ through a closed, locked metal door, but she claimed that AJ was trying to break down the door. But this was disputed by investigators and the 10-year-old witness. No physical evidence supported her self-defense claim at all. Susan later admitted to yelling at AJ's children with racial slurs and calling them, quote, cockroaches, which further inflamed the racial dynamics of this case. So people were pissed, and rightfully so. This has not, and we'll get into it a little later, but this is not the first time this has happened, and it's just like, when is enough, but anyways, so people were very upset. Continued protests in Florida and all over the United States, until after the trial, but anyways, yeah, so people were not happy. So finally, in August 2024, so just 1 year ago, the trial began. Lauren's legal team argued that she was in fear for her life, and AJ had a history of aggressive confrontations. Where? There is no evidence that AJ was ever violent to anyone. So Susan initially claimed that she was in fear for her life, saying that Owens had been aggressive toward her in the past. However, authorities found no documentation history of her being violent at all toward Susan or anyone else. It was, in fact, Susan who had repeatedly complained about neighborhood children, not just AJ's children, but everyone around her, suggesting a pattern of conflict and not specific to Ajike. She's just unhappy, I guess. I mean, to like put it very plainly, right? Susan admitted to yelling racial slurs, like I said, at the children, and was known to be very hostile towards neighbors and have very erratic behavior. So she's claiming that Ajike had the violent past, but it seems like she herself she's projecting, right? One child testified that Susan told them to, quote, "Go back to where you came from," unquote. They were born in Florida. They're Americans. This is where they're from. I'm sorry. And she used, again, racial slurs on many occasions. Ones I'm not going to repeat. But no charges were filed for any of those prior incidents. Obviously, there was a pattern of behavior by neighbors and reported to authorities. So they did have some kind of paper trail, but no charges were brought. The judge and the jury in 2024 trial found her self-defense claim to be unconvincing. You don't say. And this is all based on her past history, right, and Ajike's history as well. Family, friends, and church members from Ajike's church described her as a peacemaker and a devoted mother. She had no history of violence, no criminal record, and was widely seen as a pillar in her community at such a young age. Women like that people in general like that just astound me, just the strength that they have to be who they are, right? She was a volunteer. She volunteered a lot for her children's teams, like the sports teams and cheerleading teams, leading youth activities at church and helping her children with small business ventures like the Lily Dillies I was telling you about earlier. Law enforcement found no evidence of her ever threatening Susan or anyone else for that matter. She had no legs to stand on. Susan had nothing. She had nothing, and she was just projecting her own violent tendencies and threats onto Ajike. And luckily, thank God, in this case, they were able to prove the contrary, right? So the prosecution countered, and witnesses and police said Owens did not force entry. She knocked, she was unarmed, and she remained outside the locked door with her 10-year-old child. And it makes me think, from a mother's perspective too, you go over to your neighbor's house with your child to de-escalate the situation, right? You bring the child with you to talk to your neighbor one-on-one, hey, let's resolve this, and showing your child this is how you deal with confrontation with people, your neighbors, anyone, not just people you like, but people you don't like, right? Be an adult, be a good human. And she ends up getting shot in front of a child. She probably had no idea that was a possibility. How could she? Anyways, Susan fired a single shot through the metal door, striking Owens in the chest. AJ's 10-year-old son, like I said, was standing right next to her and witnessed the entire thing and testified in court. Prosecutors argued that AJ posed no immediate threat and was several feet from the door when she was shot. Susan had ample time to call 911 before she shot through the door, but she decided to shoot instead. So law enforcement and prosecutors rejected Susan's claim of self-defense and said that the stand your ground law did not apply because Susan was not under immediate threat and had other options such as calling the police. Anyways, this stand your ground law, I can't. People just need to settle down, dude. Anyways. Something else that I wanted to mention that did come up in the trial was that Susan reported to investigators that she had suffered from mental health issues, specifically anxiety and paranoia, and felt scared by interactions with neighbors. She expressed regret after shooting Ajike, according to her statements, but claimed she feared for her life and feared that Ajike was going to break in, though she had never tried to enter her home at any point, and per police and witness statements, they proved that. So I don't know if there's any record of her getting, help for her mental health, right? Is there any records of her going to therapy or whatever? Probably not. if she's in her 60s, probably not. But again, that's just me making assumptions. I didn't actually look that up, so don't quote me on that. But I don't know if her using the anxiety and paranoia is just kind of a scapegoat and saying like, oh, I suffer from these things, so I'm not to blame. It's these things that I'm plagued by that I just can't get away from, and that's what made me shoot AJ, is my fear and paranoia and anxiety. Coming from a person who has suffered from mental health issues, I have anxiety and I have suffered from depression in the past. So when somebody claims these things and seemingly uses it as like an excuse, or it just hits me in a particular way where I'm unsympathetic to those claims. If you suffer from those things, you should, admittedly suffer from those things, please get help. There are plenty of options out there, especially now. There's, betterhelp.com and all sorts of really accessible things for you. And, I was even talking to an older woman in my life recently about, oh, well, what are people going to think? Or nobody has to know. Why do you need to tell anyone that you're seeking help for, stuff you're suffering in silence for? No one has to know. And the stigma of mental health is not as bad as it used to be. Please get help if you are suffering from these things, and don't use it as a freaking excuse. Anyways, I'll get off my soapbox. But yeah, just doesn't rub me the right way. Is there a right way to rub me? Maybe. So the last thing that prosecutors emphasized was that Susan had a pattern of hostility and racially charged behavior in building their manslaughter case. While she had no previous criminal convictions, the jury rejected her claims of being, reasonably fearful for her life. The judge, and I love this, noted that her actions, including escalating minor disputes and ultimately firing a gun through a locked door, were disproportionate and reckless. You don't say. So, thankfully, August 14th, 2024, she is found guilty, of manslaughter with a firearm. Stand your ground defense was rejected, and legal experts called it a landmark decision in holding white defendants accountable in racially charged self-defense claims, which, yes, a resounding yes. November 1st, 2024, she was sentenced. An all-white jury, which I found interesting as well, and appropriate, convicted her of first-degree felony manslaughter, and she received a 25-year prison sentence. Maximum possible was 30 years. So they gave her almost the maximum, which, why didn't they? I don't know. The judge stated, "You had the opportunity to de-escalate. Instead, you escalated. This was not fear. This was anger." Owens' family spoke at the sentencing with her mother, describing the devastation of explaining to her 4 children of why their mother was gone. How do you explain that to these black children? I can't even begin to understand what that feels like and how you get through that. you know these are children. Like, how do you get through that unscathed, without childhood trauma or even racial bias of your own at that point, right? Like, um, how would they ever recover from that? I don't know. And if they didn't, who's going to blame them? Again, I can't even begin to imagine what that's like. Um, but AJ's family, the Owens family, they did do a lot of really good after her death. They launched the Standing in the Gap Fund for families affected by violence and injustice. The fund supports and provides resources to families directly impacted, in response to, you know, families that are affected by racial terror and race-based violence. If you feel led to donate, you can, to this cause. I I try to, whenever I promote like a charity or something on here, I try to make sure that, there are charities out there, that aren't necessarily the best to donate to. The sentiment and the message is really good, but sometimes those at the top are not ethical, or, are using the funds to fund something else. But I did my research on this one, and this one seems to be really good to donate to. It seems like they're ethical through and through, and they are doing what they are preaching that they're doing. So if you'd like to donate, to this fund, you can go to standinginthe.gapfund.org. They are trying to reach 3.5 million in donations by 2030. So if you would like to donate, go ahead and do so. And I will put a link in the description so that you can easily get to where you need to go if you'd like to donate. Also, a mural, in AJ's honor was unveiled in Ocala in February 2025. If you'd like to see a picture of that, it's online. You can go look at it. And last but not least, a Netflix documentary, The Perfect Neighbor, premiered January 2025, telling the story through body cam footage, legal commentary, and interviews with AJ's children and the community members. So if you want to know more about that case, that was really well done. There's a lot of information that I didn't cover in that documentary, so go ahead and check that out. So I want to take a minute and really, focus our attention on the issues of racism in this case. I think, I have covered other cases where racism has been evident, but not like this. So I'd like to just kind of give it its moment and really just kind of talk about it. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is the racially charged harassment in this case. So witnesses and neighbors reported that Susan had a history of verbally harassing Black children in the neighborhood. She allegedly used racial slurs, told them to go back to where you came from, again, from Florida, and targeted them in a way that made families feel unsafe. This is just so evident. And so, why is this still happening? It's 2025 and this is still happening. It doesn't make any sense to me. Anyways, if you do that, stop. Just stop right now. And it doesn't matter with what race. Just stop. Any kind of racism out there, it just drives me bonkers. Also, the disparity in the perceived threat, right? I mentioned some other cases that this parallels, right? One in 2020 and one in 2012. There is so many more as well. The Black Lives Matter movement in 2020, right? That really, Black Lives Matter. If you do your research, that's one of the charities I was talking about that, like, may not be like completely ethical, but like the sentiment and what the message is really does matter. So that brought to light a lot of these cases. AJ, a Black woman who was described as calm, loving, and concerned for her children's safety. Despite all of that, she claimed that Susan feared for her life against AJ, which a defense that hinges on very subjective perception of who AJ was, right? Which is often, tainted and seen as, racial bias, right? Like, in so many of these cases, one was jogging, one was, walking down the street and neighborhood watch shot him. She was trying to go to her neighbor's house with her child to just settle a dispute calmly, rationally, unarmed, and racial bias swayed Susan's decision to shoot her through the door. Studies have shown that Black individuals are more likely to be perceived as threatening even when unarmed or non-confrontational. So yeah, it's just something I wanted to talk about, and I have some like suggestions at the end here, right, too, that maybe something that you can do to help with racial bias, but it is everywhere, I feel like. It's everywhere you look right now. So the Stand Your Ground law and racial bias, Susan initially tried to use Florida's Stand Your Ground law to justify shooting AJ. These laws have historically been applied unevenly, no crap, with research showing that white shooters are more likely to be justified in shooting involving Black victims than the reverse. While the law didn't hold in this case, it delayed justice and triggered outrage, which I don't blame anyone for. History has shown that, these cases don't always get treated how they should, and people's knee-jerk reactions is just from past trauma, which I completely understand. Well, not me personally, I don't understand. You know what I mean. Anyways, also too, the media framing and the public perception too, right? Like, it wasn't totally obvious that they were going to make an arrest. It took them 4 days to make an arrest. That fueled a lot of concerns as well with the media, and people feared that her case, AJ's case, was not being taken as seriously because of her race, right? Public outcry from civil rights organizations, including Ben Crump, who was he joined the legal team. They helped bring attention to this case, but it shouldn't have taken national protest and celebrity lawyers to, call attention to the value of a Black woman's life. Like, that's the point I'm trying to make, right? Anyways, so like I said, what are some solutions that maybe, can racism be abolished? I don't know. I feel like there's always going to be people out there that are not good humans and don't treat every human like they should. But some things that I think we should consider as a society is, one is reforming the Stand Your Ground law. To include like clearer guidelines on what constitutes an actual threat, right? And it's not valid in every state either. Some states don't have that Stand Your Ground law as well. So maybe just taking another look at it and seeing if there's anything that we can do to kind of put some guardrails around it. And also, I think we should be mandating racial bias training for all law enforcement, prosecutors and judges, and even in the educational system and the workplaces. I know that with my job, I have training on that. It's like in the harassment training, right? But I think just a more in-depth training on what actual racial bias is and how to combat it in yourself, in your community, would be helpful, especially for future generations. And then also promoting neighborhood inclusivity and training in, homeowner associations and rental communities, I think would be helpful as well. Just the community coming together and acknowledging that this is still an issue and there's something that we need to do, and that's continue to talk about it, continue to put the light on it, right? When you talk about something, you give it less power, right? So the more we talk about it, the more we try to solve this problem, the less power racism is going to have in our lives and in our community. So those are just some ideas that I have. Hopefully, we can see those items take place, and you can encourage those items, encourage that in your own life and in your own relationships as well. So, like always, I'd like to end with a quote, and this one is from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." And this is from his letter from Birmingham Jail, 1963. So this quote fits perfectly with Ajike's case. It underscores how the injustice done to Ajike Owens isn't isolated to just her. It is everywhere, you guys. It's part of a larger system that impacts all of us. When we fight for her justice, we fight for everyone's justice. I definitely encourage peaceful protesting and just being a good human in general, right? We need to combat this at every single level. And again, like I said earlier, the more we talk about it, the more light we shed on it, the less power it's going to have. So I just encourage you. The only thing that you can do personally is, make the next right choice, right? So I encourage you to do that in your own relationships and your community. And hopefully, eventually, we will make the world a better place for everyone, right? So, all right. So, let me show you the piece. Oh, my goodness. Oh, it's beautiful. So, this is a lot different than pieces I've been doing for you guys. So this is oil pastel and pencil on it's not cardstock, it's thicker toned paper. And Ajike was part of a praise dance team at her church. And like I said, I've witnessed these teams out at my own church, and it's always so powerful and moving, and I don't really know how to describe it except by drawing it, right? So this is in honor of Ajike, and I hope that she likes it and she's looking down on us, and I love the colors that I use too. And so it's so messy. If you ever work with oil pastels, oh my goodness. But all right, I'll put it with the others. All right, you guys. Well, I hope that you enjoyed this episode as much as I love putting them together. I hope that you found it encouraging, interesting and encouraging, and again, inspirational to make a change in your own life if you need to. Be a good human, be kind to one another, and I will see you hopefully in the next episode. Bye, you guys. I love you. Bye.